Getting split ready.
For my wife, God rest her soul.
Oh, God, I'm so sorry.
No, she's not dead. We're just divorced.
Unscripted and honest discussions on divorce and separation.
Getting split ready.
What was I supposed to tell him? I divorced you from the show?
Here's your hosts, Doug Katz and Mariah Pleasant.
Hello and welcome again to Getting Split Ready. Great guest today, and actually our first repeat guest. That's a fantastic. We were around enough to have a repeat guest. Colleen Honquest, divorce coach, certified divorce coach actually from the International Coaching Federation, focusing on high conflict, and that's today what we're talking about is high conflict. She has, I think, a PhD basically in dealing with difficult personalities.
PhD.
Well, not an actual, but she deals with difficult personalities all the time. And today we're talking about high conflict divorce, which is unfortunately a pretty common occurrence.
Yes. Thank you, Doug and Mariah. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Friend of the show. You're the first friend of the show. You're here twice.
That was my warm fuzzy for the day.
We'll get you some swag.
Yeah.
So
that's got to happen. Yeah.
Conflict is inherent in divorce, right? You wouldn't be getting divorced if there wasn't some conflict. So most people aren't high conflict, though. What defines a really high conflict divorce? What does it make? How does that differentiate from a regular divorce?
Well, high conflict is usually propagated by one of the personalities in the divorce. One of the people, oftentimes you hear judges say, well, it's a he said, she said thing. And they take these high conflict divorces and they think, it's both of them. They're really both crazy. But usually it's one of the personalities that has some motivation, whether it's a personality disorder or something going on where, with the abuse and coercive control, that they want to make the whole court process really long, dragged out, and just complicated.
So you've seen cases that are drawn out or made more difficult on purpose, is what you're saying.
Oh, definitely.
Never happens. What are some of the considerations you see like essential with dealing with those situations? Because you're representing, you were on one of our other shows and talked a little bit about coaching and that you generally coach one person, not the other. In a high conflict situation, how do you manage that if you're coaching the non-high conflict person?
Well, I oftentimes am coaching, 99% of the time, I'm coaching the non-high conflict person because the high conflict individual is the, more abusive or the personality disordered person. They don't look to anyone for...
they don't think they need a coach.
Yes, exactly. They don't need help. They just want to litigate. And so I often, more than often, I deal with the person that's not the high conflict personality. So I teach them how to basically shut down the chaos and confusion coming from the other side. I teach them how to create boundaries that are very, very effective. In other words, they're used to getting emails, texts, phone calls constantly from these people. And I teach them very quickly how to shut that down and what the court will accept and really say, okay, that's fine. You don't have to communicate with these people constantly. Just shut it down.
So you have said that you filter some of the noise and the chaos for the client that you're working with. Does that filtration translate into what the court receives? Does it help them with the judges and the process of divorce?
It does because by shutting down a lot of that noise and chaos and confusion coming from the other side, they're able to think more clearly. They're able to, plot out strategies and goals, and they don't appear as, flustered and disorganized in court. They're just better able to organize everything for the court process.
What do you see as some good coping mechanisms for people who are facing high conflict? I mean, you coach people. Like, what do you tell them?
Well, aside from initially getting those clear boundaries, basically, trying to live in the moment, not dealing with the what ifs. I mean, as I said, previously when we talked in another podcast, a lot of my clients say, well, what if this or what if that? And I say, let's not deal in what ifs. Let's talk about realities. Let me tell you about what I've seen and what my clients have gone through. So we try to deal with more present situations and not, the catastrophic thinking, because that oftentimes happens when these people are so traumatized.
Do you recommend therapy in conjunction with your coaching often, or is that something that you kind of stay away from? And I know they both deal with the emotional side. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, no, I definitely recommend therapy, and if definitely, I work with therapists. I definitely talk to them and say, if you're dealing with emotional issues and you need advice on abuse and things that have been problematic for, years, you need to talk to a therapist. Some of my best referral people are therapists, so yes.
How do you manage, a lot of times, from what I've seen, high conflict people draw high conflict attorneys. And then you're dealing with two high conflict people. How do you manage that when you're in those situations? What advice would you give?
Yeah, the thing about high conflict personalities is they tend to attract what we call negative advocates, and that's an attorney that's going to fight for them, and may truly believe that they're fighting for their client and they want to advocate for them, but again, if their client is coercive and trying to control the other individual, they're fighting for the wrong cause, basically. So what I do, as I've said over and over, is I create these boundaries, and I say you don't have to respond to absolutely everything. I break down, is it necessary to respond? We create rules, and it shuts down a lot of the chaos and confusion.
So I'm in a high conflict divorce. I'm not, but let's just say I am.
I was going to say,
Are you?
Surprise!
Really?
No. Gosh. Let's just say that I am, and I haven't yet engaged with an attorney. Are all attorneys equipped to handle my case?
Definitely not. I think, and I've got to be careful here, but it's the education is not out there in law schools, and no. The short answer is no, and I think you've got to be really careful if you're in a high conflict divorce. The thing about working with someone like me is I can talk to you about what you really need in a legal advocate and clarify exactly how to find that person.
And that question wasn't designed to bash any lawyers.
Right.
It's kind of similar maybe to doctors. Some are stronger in some areas of medicine than others, correct?
Yes, definitely.
What about safety concerns? We actually, our first podcast was about physical safety. And I'm guessing high conflict can a lot of times deal with that. Like, what do you see in that area?
Yeah, no, and I listened to that podcast. It was great, and it was, dealing. You talked to a Chicago.
You're invited back anytime. Okay, you are anytime.
No, but the police sergeant that you guys talked to was great because he talked about creating a plan for these people, and I always tell my clients, if they're dealing with any kind of abuse, they've got to have a plan. They've got to have things prepared in their car, whether it's they've got to have neighbors and advocates that know where they're at, and money set aside and keys. So yeah, I think that's a great idea, and it's one of the first things I talk to them about.
How do you interface with the rest of the family? I mean, the high conflict in a lot of those situations are the two spouses who are breaking up the marriage. But there could be kids and other family members. Are you engaged with the rest of the family, or what do you see? We're kind of talking in the divorce coach context, I guess, but what do you see kind of how that high conflict ripples through the rest of the family, and how can you work with that?
Well, typically I don't deal with the rest of the family, but and again, as you mentioned before, I recommend therapy always, especially for the family and kids that are in these situations. One thing I will say that I always recommend for these parents to do is to advocate for protective counseling for their kids. In other words, to ask that their legal advocates or their lawyers file motions to basically get protective counseling for the kids, because when you're a kid in a high conflict family, you're under a lot of stress, and the parents oftentimes are so caught up in that controversy that the kids are kind of left to the sidelines. So I advocate that these kids should be, if they're younger or well, even teens, they should be in protective counseling. In other words, counseling where neither of the parents can interact with the counselor. They can't talk to the counselor before or after the sessions. They can't ask the counselor what's going on. But
Wow.
yeah,
So their own space.
These kids have to know that they can go into counseling and tell them anything they want, and neither of the parents.
Do the attorneys representing the spouses have any access to that information?
No.
So it's completely...
It's protected counseling.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very important because these kids, they've been put sometimes between these parents, and it's extremely stressful. So to have this protected space where they can go in and say anything they want and know that mom or dad can't go in and say, what did he say?
Can that be court ordered?
Yes, it usually has to be court ordered.
Well,
99%.
even more than that, they can go and say whatever they want without worrying about hurting anyone's feelings,
Yeah,
which is
'cause
what happens
kids-
a lot with kids, right? They don't want to hurt anybody's feelings because it's already happening.
Yeah.
So
Or they get weaponized, right? It becomes a way for people to fight.
Yeah, and to make some of these parents, especially abusers, they make these kids messengers, and they say, "Well, go tell your mom, she's crazy," and that for a kid whose brain is developing, and they're trying to just go to school and be a normal kid, it's so stressful. So the counseling is really important.
how do I know as a person going through a divorce if I'm if I'm high conflict or not?
If you're the one who's had conflict?
Or if my situation is high conflict.
Got
Because
it, okay.
I can imagine that for a lot of people they think they are. But statistically, what is it, 20-ish, 25%?
So, yeah, it's about 30%.
30%?
Realistically.
That really are high conflict. So what might be some markers or some ways that I can know that what I'm feeling is high conflict really is, and I really need to seek out specialists that have these extra experiences and credentialing?
Yeah, that's why I always talk about coercive control, because if, some of the women that come to me, or men, they come to me and say, well, he's never hit me, but, he's holding back on, I don't have any control over the finances, or this is what he says to me to make me feel bad. So if there's any form of coercive control or feeling of, power that, you're the lesser person in the relationship and you're really not in control of anything, that's a red flag, and that's a time to think, well, I think most of these people know it, but they're not willing to admit it until,
That probably makes sense.
yeah, or even if they're willing to admit it, there's a shame factor, to go and talk to somebody and say, oh, my relationship is really not the best, and I really need help. That's a hard thing. But if you look at the coercive control and you decide, okay, there definitely is, I have no control in this relationship. I'm completely, at the mercy of this person. That's a red flag. You're in a high conflict divorce.
If they work with you as a coach, is it confidential?
Definitely. Everything I do is completely confidential. Nothing is shared unless the individual wants me to talk to either their lawyer, or as the case has been between you and myself and financial, we share things, but it's all got to be okayed by the client.
Fantastic information, again. And if you want to learn more about high conflict divorce or need a coach, you can reach Colleen at the Divorce Coalition at thedivorcecoalition.com,
Yep.
as well as Facebook and LinkedIn. You can always come to us. We'll get you in touch with Colleen. Again, big
Thank
friend of the
you,
show. We'd love to
guys.
help her and you out. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribe to us on all the different podcast networks that you can find us on, and check out our website. You can also find us on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter.
Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you listening. Please remember that you can get through your divorce, and you can keep your finances, your integrity, and hopefully at least a little bit of your sanity intact.
Even when it's high conflict.
Hopefully even especially when it's high conflict.
Thanks very much for listening to Split Ready, or Getting Split Ready.
Thanks, guys.